Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. In this video, we are looking at tape cassette 2 from Calum. I think that's how it's pronounced, Calum Audio. I will be real honest and say I grew up with cassette. Now, while cassette was incredibly practical at the time for its ability to duplicate things and travel around with music, you could put it into your walk person in your bum bag and ride your treadly and listen to Metallica or whatever. There was nothing but a love-hate relationship with it from most of us. Cassette is technically a very clever format, so I've got nothing against Philips for inventing it, and yet at the same time, I kind of curse you, because it's a very compromised format. It was incredibly practical, and so it was so successful, but why people now look at it as being a thing that is nostalgic, outside of the, gadding about with your walk person, but I can do that with my telephone and Bluetooth and what have you, and the quality is better. I don't lose half of what I put into it. So, yes, and in terms of a music making format, after working with a cassette 4-track, a Fostex X26, it was a nightmare. Whatever you put onto tape was not what came back off. So this fantasy idea that cassette makes things cool, and this really strange idea of genre of lo-fi, it's just it's bad. So that is going to temper this whole review. It does not mean that I am going to be unnecessarily mean to the product or about the product, because I actually think that ultimately it does do what it says it's going to do, and I see that there are potential uses for that. But I definitely don't fall for the fantasy that if we were putting our stuff to cassette, it'd be wonderful. Now, before some Captain Hipster Hero leaps in to say, oh, but cassette can sound great, I know it can. I've got a Yamaha deck here that's one of the later Dolby S decks, and even with an OK cassette, that thing can sound surprisingly good. But you know what? Too little, too late in terms of the technology, because people were already going off to MP3, because in all practical senses, it beats cassettes, hands down. I also was a big fan, a big advocate, and I've still got my Sony Minidisc. Minidisc was vastly superior to both cassette and MP3, but people didn't want it. So I'm aware that cassette can be pretty darn good if you've got a good cassette, if your deck is actually a good deck and staying in trim, because a lot of times they don't stay in trim, like the heads wander out, and that's not a cool thing, not a cool thing at all. So, not a big advocate of cassette. Let's have a quick listen. This is with Tape Cassette 2 in. This is with it out. Again, not trying to say, oh, this is a good or bad. It merely shows you how dramatic a difference it can make. When it's out, the mix is a little over bright because I've got some EQ there to offset the nasty things it's done. So if we take this, still note how much it's gutted the mix, how much definition, how much clarity it has taken out without necessarily adding much of anything else of value. Now, that mix is possibly over bright in the first place, but there's a massive difference. So that you're going to see as being really cool, or ew, why would I do that? I must admit I've come in more with the ew, why would I do that, because of legacy, heritage, the fact that I grew up with this stuff. It's not a novelty. It was a daily occurrence. I was playing cassettes morning, noon, and night, and then recording to my 4-track cassette abomination all day, every day. So I lived with it, really lived with it. So it's not a fantasy or a novelty for me. Oh, the other thing, you might notice I'm in Reaper. This is not available as a VST2, only a VST3. So obviously quite a new developer since Steinberg said no VST2 licenses. They're trying to really push everybody into the VST3 format. There is no significant difference. It's just they've decided this is the format that they want to see progress. Fair enough, I guess. But if your host won't accept VST3 yet, then it may not be for you. But I'm finding my peace with Reaper. If you want to go and look at how I felt when I first started using it, there is a big review. I was never nasty about it. People acted like because I wasn't praising their little god that I was nasty and incontinent. No, I was honest, and I still struggle with it. It's still not my favourite platform, but particularly with this theme, which eases a lot of the visual. It has become a bit easier, but it has been a long, arduous road for some gain in getting my head around Reaper. If you like Reaper, brilliant. It's not about you having a go at me over that, nor am I having a go at you. If it works easily for you, absolutely brilliant. But I still will buck at people who say, Reaper's where you should start, because I think it's probably one of the most complex environments out there. So who are these cats? We've established that they are new kids on the block. Calum or Salem Audio, not quite sure what it is. I assume maybe it's a Greek or a Latin word. Don't know. Hello, thank you. Nostalgic Saturation. Someone's gilding their lily. It is a cut down of a more pro product. I always have issues with the whole pro thing. Let's say here's the pro version, that if you get this one that you're automatically better. Don't get me started on that. You've probably heard it enough. But there is a more complete version. I will also be honest at this point and say I have never yet taken up with a very specific tape VST or plugin. There is a tape mode in Scream in Reason, which I do use, but I use it more for its character that it imparts, and you might say, oh, but there you're doing it. But all of these complex here, let's make your door sound like a tape, they don't do it for me. I haven't tried Tape Pro. I've tried many other things, free to pay, and just sort of gone, yeah, I'm going to pass on that. But give it a go. Whether you can get a demo, I'm not sure, but you can definitely get this, which gives us a sense of how they code what they do. This is a freebie, and it's focused just on cassette and to some extent on Type 1 cassette, which is the affordable one. Yeah, we can get into Type 2s and 3s, chromes, metals, all that kind of stuff, and the cassettes are better, but only if you've got device and material good enough to justify it. Otherwise, they're just as nasty. It's free, but like all of these, it's free. You also have to go and log in and set yourself up and give them your email and install it and this, that, and the other. It's not the worst, but it's a little bit sort of, yeah, we'll give it to you free at a cost. Try it, see how you go. I spent some time with it, and as I've said, I've got some swings and roundabouts. We might as well go through those. So my good and bad. Well, it sounds like cassette. Not that I'm A-being against the average cassette situation, because I just don't use my cassette deck anymore. And as I say, this is a nice cassette deck. It's not the most expensive, but it's an audiophile cassette deck. It's not the average cassette deck that this appears to be emulating, or that people are nostalging about in their Knight Rider fantasies. So yeah, broadly it sounds like cassette. Broadly it does the nasty things that cassette does to what you're doing. Well, it does go some way towards making bad good, in a sense. You hear that it rounded off that that mix that was probably over bright. Are there other ways to do that? Oh, definitely. So it's not like this is the only solution, and if you're looking at tape as being the only solution for your wheels are still going round, that must be a bug. They're supposed to go on and off with the transport, or at least that's what they seem to do, and sometimes they keep going round. Bug. But this is a sort of a make bad good. Okay, whatever. Yes, it does take the edge off things, but again, I'm going to say if you think that putting a tape on something is the only way to fix your overly bright mix, then I'd say you're probably being lazy or not learning your craft. The bad, well, it sounds like cassette. I don't see how that was ever a good thing unless we're talking a nice deck with Dolby S or something like that, which did surprisingly sound really good. Looks like we may have a bug with the capstan still running. Not fatal. But there is another bug in the sense that the size of it resets every time we open. Oh, look, it shrunk. Here, let me embiggen it. Oh, look, it shrunk. Here, let me embiggen it. Surely they must have noticed this, unless it's a Reaper-specific issue. But you've assumed they would have tested it in Reaper, what with it being one of the most commonly used things, but whatever. Again, it's not fatal, doesn't seem to affect the sound, but it does say to me that, well, there are possibly a few frayed edges of sanity in the quality control department there. Right, okay, let's have a look at the features. For the moment, we will continue to look at it on the Masters. Nope, oh, went pop, don't know why that is. Let's just open it here and keep it pinned. Okay, the wheels are back to the way they should be. What have we got? Well, we've got the little animation. It makes us feel good when it works. Makes us feel worried when it doesn't work. There is also oversampling. I think by default everything is set to 16 times. It does use more DSP, but not necessarily huge amounts. Right, wrong, I don't know. I just mostly set things to 2 times. There doesn't seem to be an option to turn it off. I kind of think, why, if you've gone to the trouble of setting 2, 4, 8, 16, 16 is an immense amount, why would you not have given us a none? I mean, after all, the plugin's about nastifying things, and if you know that it's going to nastify, well, isn't that a bonus thing that it will do? Nonetheless, we then have saturation. It's probably not correct to call it saturation. It is the input drive. Therefore, it's how much it's pushing the drive circuitry inside here into getting all kinds of interesting. The theory was with cassette was that you'd allow it to go to about +3. The problem with the meters here is that they're a little hard to read. I think that this is +3. It's possibly adding some weight on the mid to lows there. But one of the problems there is that it's also rolling off a lot of top end. So, like cassette, it just makes things sound muddy. And that's not an accusation, it's merely a fact. That's what cassettes do. In terms of de-brightening, de-over this mix, yeah, it's doing a good job there. We've got this low-pass filter. Which will go down to 5K. It goes up at 22. I don't know whether cassette was ever particularly strong at 22, but fair enough, and you can roll down to 5K. But you'll notice that you don't really hear any difference until you're really sort of hitting 5K. Apparently version 1 didn't go quite that low, so people were probably like, what on earth is this knob doing, because it doesn't do anything. Double click will reset. It defaults itself to 18, which is probably reasonable enough for cassette. We'll pop it as high as we can, just because I'd rather keep it out of the game so we can focus a little more on one control than another. We can add noise. That's independent of the filter. I think these guys say they sampled that off an actual cassette. Seems realistic. I was worrying whether I was hearing extra noise in there, like some kind of electronic or mechanical noise, but I don't think I am. They default to minus 60 dB, probably reasonable enough for a standard consumer cassette to be outputting that much noise. Fair enough. Little bit of noise like this can actually be beneficial in a mix, so it's not a terrible thing. If you want to be less, you can go to minus 80 dB. If you're applying this process and getting upset about there being a little bit of noise, I sort of question some things. In theory, possibly it would be nice to have a little button to make noise go away, but at minus 80 dB, you're probably not going to notice it. We have Wow and Flutter. Wow. That's the thing that these lo-fi people are obsessed with. I'm not convinced that their wow algorithm matches cassette particularly well, but when they had time problems, instabilities, they were nasty. You will want to keep the amounts pretty low unless you're trying to do that, oh look, I'm just another drunk lo-fi kind of a person. Sorry lo-fi, but I don't have a lot of respect for it as a genre because it doesn't seem to do anything other than sound drunk. Convince me otherwise by sending me something that's, like great music. But in terms of just creating a genre out of using bit crushing and making everything sound drunk and the same fragment of a melody, not a complete melody, for 3 minutes or several hours and say that it's restful, works for you, brilliant, don't work for me. Flutter. Again, I don't know what rate they've used there. Flutter can be pretty fast. I kind of get the feeling that it's a little too fast and it's getting up into more of an FM territory, but Flutter is a little like a coarse FM. But if you haven't done the work at your instrument level to create movement, then I guess it's as good as any other way to create some movement. Maybe this does track well with cassette. I was younger, so I didn't spend a lot of time really quantifying wow and flutter. It's just when you heard it, it was like just another bad thing this cassette's doing to me. And then a total overall output level. We can plus minus 24 dB. There is also, as you would have seen, an auto gain. Now, the auto gain merely auto outputs. It is not auto gaining the input. It's just auto gaining the output. So really, it probably would have been better put here so you get the impression that it is related to this control, not to the device in toto. But it's one of those things that you work out. There is no, oh, we'll work out the perfect input for you. And I think in many ways that's fair enough. If you can't work out what you sound like the sound of, probably not a lot of sense in using the product. But you can change your output or adjust the gain. My understanding is that if I turn this up, this auto gain becomes relative to this. So so it's an offset. As I add 24 dB here, it merely will pull this back by 24 dB from wherever I've set things to. It does increase the level of hiss. So if for some reason 80 dB doesn't quite do it for you, then I guess you can pull it back here, but you may well have to turn the level back up somewhere else. So I don't know. You have to find your piece with that. But oops, that moves, but not the device. I just feel like I'd like to have it bigger because it's so hard to read things in here. I feel like there is the one more feature here, which is their impulse response. So it's possible to use these features. Let's pop it to about 8K because that's probably realistic. We'll So they have an impulse response. Most of you who follow me know that I'm not a fan of impulse responses, so it's kind of another strike against this. I sort of think, why not create an algorithm? Because my feeling on impulse responses are that they're like bunny ears that you stick on an Instaham camera, and they sort of follow you around, but they sort of don't. They're very static. Whereas an algorithm will move and flow. You know, real analog electronics is algorithmic. It's saying, this comes in, we do this to it, this process occurs to it. Some of them are things that we asked it to do, some of them are things that we just couldn't stop it from doing, which is not the same. So if your input changes, your result changes. Here, if your input changes, your result doesn't really change. Yeah, it modifies the input, so you can tell yourself that, but it's not making the algorithm behave differently. And the whole thing with nonlinear analog is about the fact that as the input changes, the algorithm's behavior changes, and that's how you end up with excitement that's beyond the obvious. Impulse response does give you some of that tape flavor, but it is always going to be a lot more static than an algorithm that says when this happens, because tape is quite complex, because there's a lot going on. So if you change the inputs, whether that's levels, frequencies, transients, you know, how fast the kick drums are kicking, all that kind of stuff, then what's happening inside the guts of the machine is actually altering in real time. It's very... which is part of why tape can have its charm. But nonetheless, it's a free product. You've got this impulse response that kind of yuckifies the sound, but it does it in a way that's consistent enough with it being probably a reasonable take of a recording of a average cassette deck. So, cool, fair enough. That's what it does. Now we're going to close that down and spend a little bit more time walking through the individual tracks, because I thought, well, if this is being used as a saturator, which is what they're suggesting, cool nostalgic saturation nonetheless, then we might as well look through instance by instance. So we've got... oh, I deliberately set this up as though it were something that somebody might be putting to 4-track in the mid-80s, when these things became available and affordable enough, and we would have drum machines, maybe like a Mini Pops or a CR78 or a 606 floating around. So hence a lot of the choices for sounds. Now these devices were surprisingly bright. Put it through cassette. Surprisingly not bright. So that's just how it goes. It tames the tops of the sound. And that's right or wrong. I don't know. It just is. We move to our next one. Next track is Phase Plant. So a real classic Ricky Wilde kind of a thing going on here. Oh, Phase Plant 2, just quick mention there is Phase Plant version 2 which has a lot more attention in the modulation. For some reason I feel like it sounds a bit better. I may be wrong there, but I feel like the sound engine's a little tighter than it used to be. There's also the ability to do a certain amount of skinning, which I must say this option pleases me more than the standard option. I find it calmer, more restful, easier to encompass. But Phase Plant 2 is a big leap forward. I liked Phase Plant when I reviewed it. Go back, have a look at it. I liked it a lot. But I think this really puts it where it could have, should have been from the beginning. So it's a good work, Phase Plant. I've already said that elsewhere, but again, it's worth a look. If you didn't gel with Phase Plant first time round, myself and several other people I have seen are going, this is what I was hoping Phase Plant was going to be. So let's pop in tape cassette. Okay, we seem to be adding some level there. In theory, that shouldn't happen. Some of that is probably just from saturation. There's a little bit more noise than in theory we should have, but it's lifting itself up into the mix and becoming more audible or mixable. Remember, we mix here, we don't mix there, so this is lifting it into the bit that we do mix. So in a sense, it's doing a decent job. And the cassette starts and stops again. Obviously, there's some kind of metric for that. We're going into a rhythm bus, which is now suddenly carrying my voice. Creepy, freaky. Let's stop that. Fix that. Oh no, now the cassette's still going. What have we got here? So this is a combination now of our drums and bass. If I left the impulse response on, it just, well, this is what cassette did. You bounce on your 4-track, 2 tracks, and you go, oh, that's all right. Okay, that's sort of salvageable compared to what I put into it. Bounce them to another track, and you're kind of like, oh no. So in this case, I kept it off, really just trying to take advantage of any saturation or compression that may be going on. There's no talk about what's really happening in here. I don't know whether there is compression. It's not as dramatic as it can be on other tape, but I don't really know the compression properties of cassette. When I was using it, compression was not a thing we spent all our waking lives talking about. But it's done something or other on the bus. Now we go to our guitar. Again, Phase Plant, a sort of a DX style patch. Annoying. Now, whether this is good or bad, I don't know. The thing is, when soloed, you can feel like, oh, that's just too bright. So that seemed like an improvement. Of course, it makes it sound more like a piano. But within the mix, the dulling down, I don't know. It's one of those things. It's... I decided to leave it in so that it didn't fight with the string. So a decision was made, but just sort of be aware that something that sounds good in solo here may actually fail in the mix. And then tried to really go down the road of cheap string machine. You can hear a little bit of intermodulation distortion happening. Of course, the wow and flutter are really taking their toll. But we have thinned this sound down, taken away some of what people may feel as a little screechy. So it sits within the mix quite nicely. So in terms of saying, okay, well, I'm going to use this tool as my EQ, then yeah, limited options, but it does work. So in no way do I want people to think that I'm just saying that it sucks, because I don't think it does. If this is a path you want to go down, fair enough. And then we can look at the masters again. I've used Klipper on the output, largely because there's somebody else who's just released a Klipper for, I think it's $79, claiming how it's just this amazing revolution in the industry and that they've come up with this way to do everything so much better than anybody else. And I guess there's always a sucker wanting to spend $79 on a VST rather than actually, well, wise up. As we see, using the tape all the way through the mix and then using it, at least with the IR on the master, is not a winning combination. That may be okay, but generally by the time I've got to the masters, my mix sounds the way I want it to. I'm looking to sweeten it, not to dull it. But there are situations in which this is of value. So without the impulse response in, then yeah, fair enough, it does do something useful. But I think we need some EQ. There's our lovely hiss, quite audible. So if you're wanting brightness and chirpiness, you're going to need to boost, which means that especially if you've put in some hiss, you're going to pull that up. Now, if you're going, that's the thing of the times, not a drama at all. Otherwise, yeah, you could have some frustrations at that point. Matter of fact, this is actually helping control some of that hiss. I think most of that hiss is from, I think it was our string. Yeah, most of it's coming from our string. So if we pulled that back, we'd have a little less trauma with that. So let's let that go back. But still, nonetheless, oh, hang on, that was wow. Yeah, it's doing its thing, so it's fine. It just depends on what you're looking for in your mix, and I set this up to work a little differently from how I would normally mix. So if it seems a little irrelevant for me to start with, that's because it is a little irrelevant for me to start with. So a little bit of EQ to help balance what we've got. And I'd say we have got there. Has Tape Cassette 2 made my process better? Bearing in mind I've been doing this for 30 years, no. Is it a thing I'm going to reach for? Well, offhand, probably not, because I feel like I've got a lot of these things covered already, and the kind of let's just put this one bloop, let's just put a mask over it every single time, to me seems like a less the well thought through solution. But then I see in forums people saying over and over again, oh, well, that just makes it easy for me, so therefore it's good. And it's like, okay, fair enough, but if you know you're not doing good work, why not hire a mix engineer? Why do bad work? You know, when you go to see a band play, let's say, for example, I went to see Metallica on the Black Tour. They're in my Ministry t-shirt. There's a few people like, but I saw Metallica on the Black Tour, and I can't remember how many supports there were. It might have just been Caius, who I wasn't massively into and didn't really know anything about, but they put in a lot of hard work. So by the time I'm halfway through their set, even though I'm kind of thinking, I don't know, this is not necessarily me, I'm developing a lot of respect for them and thinking maybe it's worth listening to some Caius. So they did their job. They came out there to entertain me, and they did a good job. When Metallica hit the stage, to be honest, I felt like they walked through, and they were, well, I think the same when I saw Bon Jovi on Slippery When Wet. I felt like they walked through. And I wasn't overjoyed. I ended up actually selling or giving away my Slippery When Wet as a result of that experience. I got less interested in the band. It was just like, oh, they're a bit dull. I later bought back Slippery When Wet, and now when I just listen to it for Slippery When Wet, it's like, whoa, what an experience. Good on you, Bob Rock and Bon Jovi. But Metallica didn't really seem to be trying very hard, and they kept going off stage, and they didn't seem like they were there to entertain me. So if you're of that mindset where you go, oh, well, this is easy, and it saves me having to do what I don't think I can do, but you're not prepared to do what you could do, which is bring somebody who's a specialist in, then I question whether you're doing the right thing. Like if, let's say, you went to see Metallica and they're a really firing unit, and when you got there, James Hetfield was replaced with somebody who could barely play, couldn't sing, and didn't have a Lemmy. How impressed would you be? Or would you be like, you're taking the piss? And that's a very experience that I walked into when I went and saw Guns N' Roses. It was really Axl Rose and a bunch of kids. And Axl had such a tood, and he kept walking off stage and leaving with us with a bunch of kids who, try as they tried, weren't seasoned enough, and were far more technical than actually even knowing how to entertain us properly. And again, you might think I'm labouring this point, but this is a massive reason why a lot of people don't get the plays they're looking for, don't get the interaction from fans, is because a fan listens to this track where somebody's just sort of gone, oh, well, I'll put a Buckethead mask on it, or whatever they think is happening, and suddenly it's going to be okay. And it's not okay, because that's like me going to see Guns N' Roses, and it's Axl with a bad attitude and a pile of kids who just aren't the equal of Guns N' Roses. If it had been the Axl Rose show, it might have been okay. Now, on that show, I saw Rose Tattoo, who I've never seen Rose Tattoo live. Of course, I grew up with them all over the radio, being in Oz. But I don't know, I felt like they kind of walked through. But Sebastian Bach out of Skid Row, know nothing about Sebastian. But I know something about Sebastian now. He poor bastard. His the audio was messed up for him. There were nothing but technical problems the whole way through the show. The crowd wouldn't rise for him. But he worked hard. He did everything he could. He swore more than usual, which is impressive for Sebastian. And he tried very hard. So I came away from that show with a lot of respect for Sebastian Bach and far less respect for Axl Rose. So when you do this, like, oh, well, I'll just do, because let me get away with it. This is the message you're sending your potential fans home with. That's my real point here. Now, that's not necessarily anything to do with this. This is a device. It does what it says it's going to do on the tin well enough for the price. Is it the most elegant? Is it the most perfectly emulated cassette? Well, my usual answer is I couldn't care less. It does create the alteration, broadly speaking, that we would anticipate from if we were to record our music to an ordinary cassette, play it back and go, is that what I get? So in that sense, it's good. It's worth a play with. You can definitely hear how it's changed the trajectory of this mix. If I had done this mix without this, then I might have ended up with a brighter mix. But then coming into it with the idea of this is going to cassette, I may well still have come out with other tools to roll off the excessive, evil brightness that cassette would otherwise slay for me. Its final words is that it's an interesting device. It kind of says what it's going to do on the box. How accurate a representation, I don't know. But for the price, you can't bitch too much. It would be nice if you could turn noise off. It would be nice if there was a little more attention to detail so that they could not have this little bug where the wheels are going. Inconsequential but annoying, and the less inconsequential but still annoying bug where this resizes itself, and the fact that they seem to have focused more on looking cool and catching certain kinds of people's attention than in actually delivering something that's cool. The VU units are huge, but the legend, which is the reason for the VU units, is too small to be of any use. They might as well have not had it. Or maybe the case is that they are of no value. In Hertz Delay, where I created a VU, honestly, that was just for visual appeal, and I deliberately left no metric in there whatsoever. If it's pinning, it's fully loud, dude. Because I was trying to make it very clear to people, this is not for actually knowing what's going on in any detailed way, whereas this has given us a metric indicating that we're supposed to read and get value from this. So it's an interesting enough product. It's not the most advanced, but they want us to move to their Pro. They want us to be impressed with this and go, oh yeah, it's so good, man, and go to the Pro. I'm not going to go there simply because, well, it's not a path I feel the need to take. You might, if you do and it works for you and you feel like it's improving your connection with fans, not improving your egotistical approach to yourself or hiding the things you don't want to manage better, either by learning to mix really or hiring somebody who knows how to mix. You know, you wouldn't hire a Duff guitarist if you were Metallica. You wouldn't be like, oh, we'll replace James with someone useless because it doesn't matter, the fans won't care. That's not a decision you'd see with respect. So go whichever way you think. I hope you have found this useful. It's a product that I meant to mention at the beginning I'd been asked to be looking at for a long time and kept putting off. But it sort of got to the point where really it sat there for so long it was either a case of I will not review you or I will have a look. I had a look, and to be honest, I ended up having more fun with it than I anticipated, but at no point am I going to say to anybody, get this and it's going to magically, make your mixes amazing, what have you, because, well, nothing really does that, and anything like this that gives the impression that it's going to do that is probably going to do more damage than good to the psychology of the situation, if not actually the situation. It sounds horrible because it's cassette. It's meant to sound horrible because it's cassette, so make of that what you will. Again, I hope you found some value in this. If you have any questions in general or provide some positive feedback, no point just writing to say I'm an idiot, because we'll probably just delete that anyway and you won't have achieved anything. If you want to hit the subscribe, try put it on in. Otherwise, try it out and make sure that you are having a good day.